Welcome to the WattSherpa Podcast, your guide to energy efficiency and savings.
I'm honored to speak today with Dr. Diana Gragg, Managing Director of the Explore Energy Program at the Precourt Institute for Energy at Stanford University. Dr. Gragg is also a core lecturer in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at Stanford, and she has a wide range of videos available on Stanford's Understand Energy Learning Hub and on YouTube. She does an amazing job of helping simplify the very complex world of energy infrastructure and explains how it impacts our climate. And for any Magic School Bus fans out there, Dr. Gragg is known for bringing that character to life in some of her videos. So thank you so much for
I'm
joining me
happy to be
today.
here.
Great. So one of the first questions that I had is that I just want to, one of my goals with Watch Sherpa is to help young students like myself pursue their passions for the environment as professionals. So to start, I would just love to understand how you developed your passion for the environment and the path that you took to land the role that you have at
Yeah,
Stanford.
no, that's a great question. Always easier to look back on how you got somewhere rather than how you're figuring out going forward. I grew up in Houston, Texas. Air pollution was very prominent in my childhood, had health issues related to it, and always have been a lover of nature, the environment, things like that. And I always had that as a goal of mine to work in areas having to do with the environment and air pollution in particular. So I did my undergraduate work in chemical engineering at the University of California at Berkeley with an emphasis on air quality. Worked in industry for a few years, which was an excellent experience. Really thought I could try to change things from inside industry since a lot of the challenges originate there. There's a lot of opportunity there. I did that for about 4 years, made a lot of advancements on efficiency in the industry space when I was working there, but then decided to pursue my master's and PhD to shift and be more focused on environmental issues. So I came to Stanford, did a civil and environmental engineering degree, both master's and PhD, in a program called Atmosphere Energy, which was this perfect kind of joining of the atmosphere, things that I care about, the air quality stuff, and the energy resources that cause a lot of them. And so through that, through my PhD, and then I did a postdoc on energy efficiency, really also developed my passion for teaching and started teaching at Stanford in 2015. And so I've been teaching since then, in addition to running the Explore Energy program at Stanford, which is really about student opportunities in energy. So fellowships, engagement, other things for students. So that's how I got into this space. It wasn't always how I thought I was gonna go, but certainly it has been following my passions at different stages and taking opportunities as they came along.
It's interesting you say that because I feel like every time I talk to someone in this field, they always have a very unique background in how they got interested in the fields and the way that they're approaching it. So I first came across your work when researching the energy grid, and I discovered the free Understand Energy Learning Hub from the Stanford Energy Department. I was wondering if you could just share more about the initiative and why you and your colleagues decided to make it available for free
Yeah,
to the public.
absolutely. So the class, it's based on a class I teach called Understand Energy. That's the class I started teaching in 2015. The class itself has been taught by some of my colleagues for 30 plus years. Always very mission driven course. So this course is really about helping everyone understand the energy systems all the way from the different resources, fossil fuels to renewables, to their impacts, the technologies, to the regulation, the policy around it, the energy equity issues. Our mission is if people understand those systems better, they can make better decisions personally and professionally. And so for a long time, we've been reaching 300-ish Stanford students every year through our class. But we really wanted to elevate. We do a lot of curation for this class to make it easy for people to understand these different complex issues. And we really wanted to broaden our reach and help people anywhere and everywhere at all different levels, from high schoolers to professionals, really understand the whole energy landscape. So offering this free resource, Understand Energy Learning Hub, was really just a way to take all this work that we were doing to make these systems understandable and make them more widely available to support these missions of just transitions, energy equity, sustainability, addressing climate change, these other things. so people can really understand the systems that are behind our energy services.
I mean, I totally understand, given that one of the main goals of WattSherpa really has been to help with this sort of education on what people can do to combat climate change and just to educate more about climate change itself. I've discussed on our website how my family reduced our carbon footprint by about 2/3 with a series of energy transitions like switching to LED lights, switching to an electric vehicle, and now a new geothermal HVAC system. So it's very easy to see how these changes are helpful for the environment, but it's not always as easy to understand how they can also save money for families over the long term. So how do you think we can help educate homeowners about not just the environmental impacts of energy efficiency, but also the economic?
It is it's a very big challenge. And there's a lot of different ways that I think different groups are tackling it. Sometimes with utilities and others that are providing your electricity or your heating services or your natural gas, they aren't always the best communicators about the opportunities for your home and for your energy efficiency. And it very much varies state by state how invested utilities are in helping consumers really save energy or make their homes more energy efficient. And so that is that's a barrier in terms of just getting connection to those households and communities. So I have colleagues, for example, my colleague Kirsten Stasio, who is running the Nevada Clean Energy Fund, which is a green bank, and there's green banks all across our different states. These are organizations that are really looking at how do we get into communities and do it's really a hard work family by family workshopping, understanding what opportunities they have, what rebates they have, what's available to them for all different kinds of income levels. It takes a lot of boots on the ground to do that kind of education. It's hard to do it mass because a lot of that is very customized. It's very location specific. It depends on where families are and what kind of building stock they have and whether they own their homes or they're renters. There's different solutions. So it is a big challenge. I would say we have our Understand Energy Learning Hub. The next hub that we're launching actually at the end of this year is our Extreme Energy Efficiency Learning Hub. And so that is meant to now be a resource to really think about integrative design, whole systems thinking, energy efficiency from thinking about how do we get services in a more efficient way, which is often, as you've probably found out with your own transitions, it's a lower cost and more comfortable and better service when you start implementing these energy efficiency benefits. So there isn't a one size fits all answer to that. There's government programs, but I guess I'm just acknowledging that it is a challenge to educate.
Yeah, I know just from personal experience on projects that I've worked with in the past, outreach and explaining the benefits of programs that are beneficial to the environment can be the most difficult part of it. I would say probably one of the most appealing and wide known ways that families can make change to help the environment is by electric vehicle adoption, which is obviously rising across the US and globally. But some people have concerns about resource extraction for batteries. And I've heard others say that the electricity used to charge EVs may not be all that clean. There are also potential environmental justice issues and geopolitical dependence on foreign suppliers. So could you share your perspective on these concerns and how we can
Yeah,
address them?
absolutely. So one of the themes that we talk about in Understand Energy is that there's no free lunch. Everything has complexity in terms of the challenges. I will just say from as somebody that's really cares about and health impacts of air quality, I'm really excited about the transition to electric vehicles. And it's not one that's talked about a lot, but the emissions from our cars happen in our communities. And if we can take those emissions from our communities, we really do have a positive impact on human health. And so beyond the climate impact. The other thing that isn't necessarily talked about a lot, but it's not a one-to-one comparison because electric vehicles are 3 to 4 times more efficient than their gasoline counterparts. And as soon as you make things more efficient, it makes the decarbonization of the fuels easier. It makes meeting those services easier because you don't need as much energy at the front end. And so electrification in transportation is just one example. When you're exchanging a, a heat engine with an electric motor, it's vastly more efficient. The other thing that electrification gives you is a diversification of your fuels. When we talk about not being dependent on a single fuel like oil, now we have a diversity of fuels that can provide that electricity service. And what we see with grids and the electricity being provided is those will get cleaner over time as you're using that electric vehicle, which you wouldn't see that cleanup of your fuel over time with something like gasoline. So there's just some thoughts. I want to definitely acknowledge that in terms of the batteries and the minerals that we're getting to supply those batteries, there are major social, environmental challenges with the way that we resource a lot of those materials. And then there are countries like China that really dominate parts of that supply chain. And those are challenges and risks that need to be paid attention to and addressed. We have programs at Stanford. There's one called Mineral X that's really looking into this, another one called Storage X. It's looking into how do we how do we get these materials in a more environmentally and socially responsible way, because it has very real impact on humans today. In the future, we can't recycle our way into the electrification future we want, but certainly recycling needs to be a big component of this. And so if you were thinking about making this a full loop, you would have your battery in your electric car. When your range got too low, you would put it on grid service and you'd use that battery as stationary service. And then when it got too low of capacity, then you would recycle it. And then you would reuse those materials and put them back into the battery chain. That definitely needs to be a part of the solution. We take students to Redwood Materials, which is a player in this area, to actually see how battery recycling can happen so that we can close that loop.
I think it's great that at Stanford, it's obviously you're addressing both sides of the situation, that obviously there's issues that need to be addressed and doing good work towards that, but also recognizing that we're still taking steps forward and they're still far more efficient than your traditional car. And I think a lot of the times people will focus on one or the other. So I think it's great. There can be a focus on both coexisting. I'd say another big change that people can make within their own homes, which is maybe slightly less known about, is changes in HVAC systems, which can account for 40 to 60% of energy use within homes and commercial buildings. Things like heat pumps are growing in popularity in the US. Like I mentioned, we installed a geothermal system in our home. Could you share your perspective on heat pumps and how their adoption could change the environmental impact of how we heat and cool buildings in the
Absolutely.
US?
So heat pumps, I like to tell my students that heat pumps are magic. When you think about a heating service, a very efficient natural gas furnace is going to be 97%-ish efficient. That's pretty good. But when you start talking about a heat pump, if you're using the same kind of measures, we're talking about efficiencies that are 300 to 400%. So that's why I say it's magic, because how can you have more than 100% efficient? Because a heat pump moves heat rather than creating it. And so the amount of energy that we're putting in is vastly less than the amount of heating service we get by moving that heat rather than trying to create the heat. So a heat pump is what you would think about as a refrigerator, as an air conditioning unit. Those are heat pumps. They're moving heat from somewhere where it's colder to somewhere where it's hotter. And you can do that so efficiently. And it takes a source of fossil fuels out of our homes. There's been studies that have shown air pollution impacts from burning even natural gas in like water heaters or in space heaters. And it again diversifies your fuels for that electricity so you can start to decarbonize our heating and cooling services. And then heat pumps can work both ways. Unlike our traditional air conditioning units, they can provide both the heating service and a cooling service. Geothermal heat pumps, that's just even getting more efficient, because now instead of trying to draw heat from a winter outside that might be 32 degrees, might be freezing outside, you're drawing it from the ground, which could be 50 or 60 degrees. And so it just makes that heat pump much more efficient because you're moving heat from a less cold space. And so we see dramatic improvements. So that geothermal part is really just an efficiency gain in your heat pump, where you can provide this great service and use a lot less energy to do it.
Yeah, I think one thing in particular that I really love about heat pumps is how economically it's beneficial and obviously for the environment as well. So think it's very important that more people are able to learn about
Absolutely.
that. I know that you had touched on batteries earlier, which are obviously becoming increasingly important in this new energy system that we're creating. And I've seen some of your lectures about battery systems and how they can help make our grid more flexible and reliable. This is more important as we start using more renewable sources like solar and wind, which are obviously clean, but not operational 100% of the time. So could you talk about how battery systems can complement these new renewable energy to power a cleaner
Yes,
grid?
for sure. So energy storage in general is helpful for the reliability of our grids. And for a long time, we've relied on pumped hydro as our energy storage, and it's still a very small piece of the overall electricity generation that's going on. In order to keep our electricity grid humming in terms of being able to light our lights and power our computers, supply and demand have to be matched in real time. And so we have grid operators that are working on that challenge of matching supply and demand in real time. And so storage is one of those ways that gives them a lot of flexibility to be able to match supply and demand. As we have integrated more and more renewables on our grid, they are add to the challenge because they aren't available all the time. And if you think about wind, it's going to be available when it's blowing, or the sun is only available during the daytime hours, things like that. And even as we are able to predict exactly when they're available, we do still have these gaps that we need to match in real time. Batteries are great energy storage compared to the pumped hydro, which we've done in the past, partly because they're very modular and they can take up a lot less space to provide the service. And they're very easy to install in wherever we have congestion on the grid or wherever a consumer might need it. So it's a very flexible type of energy storage. And the time scales of those batteries in terms of the energy they can provide are very much paired with a day-to-day or maybe 2 or 3-day service. And so they pair very well with wind and solar because they can charge when there's a lot of sunshine, and then they can be available in the evening to discharge during that day. It's very good for that 1, 2, 3-day kind of service. And then we see innovative ways to use even individuals' batteries where they can be combined together and provide a grid service as like a virtual power plant or something like that, where people's own home batteries can participate now as a reliability option for the grid. So they're great on that scale. Looking forward, I would say the next energy storage that we need to figure out is seasonal storage, something that's long term. Is there a way to take excess sunshine in the summer and store it for use in the winter when there's less sunshine? I think there's a lot of research going on and thinking about how do we have long-term storage to just again increase that renewable deployment and that reliability on our grid.
And I think this is really one of the most important issues because no matter how much we educate people about the impact on the climate, if it comes down to not being able to turn your lights on, people will obviously never be willing to transition. So obviously very important that we were able to figure
Absolutely.
this out. In addition to storage, all this energy transition is increasing the demand for electricity itself in the US. So while we are seeing a decent amount of investment in renewable energy generation, it's much more challenging to build out transmission lines to deliver that energy. Can you talk a little bit about that challenge and how we might address
Yeah,
it?
I wish I knew the solution to that. I acknowledge that it's a challenge. We have had flat electricity demand in the US for a decade now, and it is expected to increase dramatically in terms of electricity demand with electrification of our transportation, electrification of our homes, and increased use from things like data centers and AI, which are really supposed to start demanding even more and more electricity. So it is a challenge that's on the minds of our regional operators and our grid operators in terms of how do we meet those. Um, Transmission is one of the challenges, and that comes into play because often our best resources, maybe our wind resources, aren't necessarily where most of the demand is occurring. And so we do have to take our windiest part is the kind of the plains of the US, and our demand centers are usually on the coasts. And so you do have a lot of transmission in order to get that done. We've seen models where that's been successful. Texas was actually very successful at this. They just said, we're building transmission. And if we build transmission out to our windy places, the wind developers will come and connect to it. They were able to do that because it was within one state. It gets much more complicated when you're talking about cross states, ownership of land, going through sensitive areas. People don't want transmission lines. It gets really challenging. There are a lot of companies that are looking at other solutions of ways of using existing transmission lines to increase their capacity or to just be more mindful about how much electricity is flowing through different corridors to be able to divert it. So there are innovations in that, but ultimately, a larger, more connected grid makes it easier to meet our demand at all times using these renewable resources that we have available across our country. And so there's a benefit for the reliability of the system to be able to have that, but it faces a lot of barriers. And I would say right now, even just interconnecting on the existing grid is a major barrier to additional renewable energy deployment. And that's mostly from a policy and regulation standpoint that it becomes really challenging.
Like you're saying, it's not exactly like we can build a giant wind farm in the middle of New
Exactly.
York. So it's definitely going to be, in order to reach the most amount of people, it's a key challenge to tackle. Another energy source that you have some great content about is nuclear energy, which is obviously an incredibly efficient power source given its density. While nuclear energy can be a great source of clean energy, many people do unfortunately associate it with danger because of radioactive waste and nuclear weapons. Can you share your perspective a little on nuclear energy and how it might play a role in our clean energy
Absolutely.
future?
So, just some facts about nuclear energy. We have more nuclear power plants in the US than any other country in the world. We really started developing nuclear energy in the 50s and 60s and had a lot of growth. And that growth really stopped in the early 80s following the incident at Three Mile Island in Pennsylvania that really just caused a lot of fear about nuclear energy. And from that, we don't have a robust nuclear energy industry that is building new nuclear power plants now. We have a few cases of new nuclear energy facilities being built or not getting all the way built, Georgia, South Carolina, but they're way over budget and over time. And so for the US, we don't right now have a robust system to build new nuclear power plants. And the challenge that our existing nuclear power plants are facing in places where the electricity is bought and sold on a wholesale market, so basically on an open market, they aren't able to compete with other resources like wind, solar, and natural gas. And so they're struggling unless they get subsidies from the government to compete at the market scale. Nuclear energy is, like you said, extremely energy dense in terms of the amount of uranium and the amount of waste that you get. But it also is a very complex resource because of the safety aspects and the redundancy that's needed and the safeguarding of those facilities can make them more challenging from an economic standpoint to compete with some of their renewable energy. And especially in a environment where we don't have a price on carbon emissions. So they're having to compete. They might be a zero carbon emission resource, but they're competing with natural gas that doesn't have to pay for the carbon it emits. And so I would say other countries are seeing expansion of nuclear. I don't see anything in the near future, a lot of expansion in the US. We just don't have that robust industry. And it can take a long time to get a new nuclear power plant, which is a lot of capital investment online. Whereas things like wind and solar, and we're going to see expansion in geothermal, those tend to be smaller capital, more modular, and faster deployment than new nuclear power plants. And so nuclear power plants faces a lot of challenges to growth.
I think nuclear power is really one of the most interesting topics to learn about. And while you're saying, unfortunately, it is quite difficult economically, politically to really innovate and grow on. So hopefully we'll see progress on it, whether it's in the near or farther future. So I guess throughout the interview, we talked a lot about problems and opportunities in the US, but I'm actually doing a study this fall that includes research on energy infrastructure in Africa. And I've seen some of your work discussing the inequity of energy access in developing countries. So I was wondering if you could talk about how we can balance the continent's increasing demand for energy with the global goal of reaching net zero emissions.
Absolutely. So, first, I just want to make the point that energy access is really important for human development, especially at the low end. So, the giving those first bits of electricity access and things like that can really have an improvement on quality of life expectancy, education, things like that. And so we see a strong correlation with human development and their access to modern energy um, services like electricity or carriers like electricity. It's really important for human development to have access to these more modern resources. So I would say different countries and different places is the challenge is tackled in different ways. And again, I wish I had a one size fits all kind of solution for this. Some places, Kenya has seen a lot of investment. The government's done a lot to lay the groundwork for investment in geothermal energy there so that with the government taking the lead on that, companies are already have the riskiest part of their industry taken care of by the government, and then they can come in and develop those resources. So I think we need innovations like that. I have colleagues that are working on innovations that are more like how can we have stable, reliable microgrids instead of being connected to a larger grid so that we can provide a reliable service to more remote places. There are ways to tackle it, but it really takes stability and investment opportunities for companies or industry or different organizations, and it can be a real challenge in a lot of these places to do that. So it takes a lot of innovation, I would say, to do this, but it's important. It's important to have that energy access.
I agree with you that I wish there was a solution that fits in every situation. But I think as I've done more research into this, like you're explaining, it really just takes the collaboration of many different government, companies, new innovation in order to create this environment that we require. I hope that collaboration can continue to grow. So I guess to close out, I would love to learn more about how you think about education and the environment. As I mentioned in the intro, you're the managing director of the Explore Energy program at Stanford. And I understand that the program is intended to help support energy initiatives for students across every school at Stanford. So could you just share more about the program's mission and any advice you have for students interested in pursuing a career path and make an impact in the fight against
Yeah,
climate change?
absolutely. So first I would just say that I've been working in this space now for about 20 years, and it is an exciting time to be in the energy space or the climate space because there's so much changing right now and there's so much opportunity to be able to take advantage of. And so I would say the opportunities to make a difference and make an impact in this space are broad. They're obviously engineering and technological, but there's policy impacts, there's human behavior, there's psychology. What we try to do in the Explore Energy program at Stanford is really, like you say, we work across all 7 schools because we need students that have all different interests and backgrounds to come together to solve these issues. It's not just a technology solution, it is an all of the above encompassing solution. And so a lot of what we do is bring those students together. We bring in experts and practitioners that are working in these spaces to connect with students. So my advice would be there if there's ever opportunities to meet with somebody that's working in different space, just ask because a lot of people like to share. And that networking is really important to try to think about where you might want to fit in this space or to make a difference. Education is a huge part of it because, like I said, it's part of our mission. Our mission is to help everyone understand the complexity of these systems so that we can all make better decisions, better choices, whether it's personally or professionally. And so that starts with education and that starts with individuals, with companies, with groups. We work with a lot of different partners, community partners, nonprofits, things like that to help with that education mission. So it's really important. The thing I would say, and I started with it, is there is a lot of exciting things happening in this space. And as humans, we often underestimate our ability to make change. but yet we can make change happen a lot faster than we think. And we have a lot of examples of that. The deployment of solar PV is one big example. But just to maintain that hopefulness that us as humans, it just starts with one person saying, I'm going to go tackle that. And then you bring others along with you and spillover effects and things, and we can make broad change happen. And I want students your age or others to just have that hopeful view that we can resolve a lot of these. We can tackle a lot of these challenges working together. We can figure out a lot of the energy equity and just transition challenges to this energy transition. And we can make it a better system.
I think that's just a great message. No matter what school you come from or what you're interested, any individual can make a change that can create a positive impact for this fight. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today and sharing your insights. It's a truly interesting conversation and an important one as well. And just thank you for dedicating your career to helping train and educate the energy leaders of the future. For anyone interested in learning more about our energy system, I highly encourage you to check out the Understand Energy Learning Hub at understand-energy.stanford.edu, or just search for Dr. Gragg on YouTube. And just thank you
Thank you
again,
so
Dr.
much
Gragg.
for the time.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please like and subscribe and visit us at WattSherpa.com.